So here's a scenario I want you to sit with for a second. You're at a dinner party, or maybe it's a casual thing, like a backyard barbecue, and somehow the conversation shifts to money. It always does eventually, doesn't it? And someone mentions they just paid off their house. Someone else is talking about their investment portfolio like it's a hobby they've had for years. And you're sitting there, maybe holding your drink a little tighter, nodding like you totally get it, thinking, when did everyone figure this stuff out? Because here's the thing, you're not broke, you're not financially reckless, you pay your bills, you show up to work, you're doing what you're supposed to do. But somewhere in the back of your mind, there's this quiet, persistent little voice that says, are you behind? Like, compared to where you should be at this point in your life, are you actually on track? Or are you quietly falling further and further behind a timeline that nobody ever actually showed you? That question is what keeps a lot of people up at night, and honestly, it's what I've spent an embarrassing amount of time thinking about. My name is Emmy, and I basically spend too much of my brain space on money, financial psychology, why some people seem to accumulate wealth almost naturally while others work just as hard and somehow end up with very little to show for it, and what the real difference is between those two groups, not the obvious stuff, the stuff that actually matters. And what I want to talk to you about today is something that I think could genuinely shift how you see your financial life, especially if you're somewhere near or around 40 and you've got this nagging sense that you missed some invisible window. Because here's what I want you to understand before we go any further. The milestones that get thrown around about what you should have by 40, most of them are built on assumptions that probably don't apply to your actual life. But, and this is the important part, that doesn't mean you shouldn't have some kind of target. The goal today is to figure out what actually matters, what you might genuinely need to catch up on, and how to do it in a way that doesn't require you to become a completely different person overnight. This is going to be a real conversation. Let's get into it. The problem with should. Let's start here, because I think we have to. The word should is doing a lot of heavy lifting in this conversation, and it's worth pulling it apart a little. When you Google, what should I have saved by 40, you'll get these tidy little benchmarks. 3 times your salary saved, a paid-off car, a growing retirement account, maybe a house with some equity. And look, those aren't bad targets. But here's what those benchmarks don't account for. The fact that you might have spent your 30s raising kids or caring for a parent or getting a late start degree or rebuilding after a divorce or just surviving a career transition or a global pandemic that kind of ate 3 years of financial progress for a lot of people. The benchmarks assume a linear path, and almost nobody actually has a linear path. There's a concept in behavioral economics called the expected life course, basically the imaginary timeline that society projects onto us about when we should hit certain milestones. Finish school by this age, career established by this one, house and family by here, and financial security by here. And the thing is, most people internalize this timeline so deeply that when they deviate from it, for any reason, good or bad, they feel like they've failed, even when they haven't. So the first thing I want you to do is genuinely separate the idea of what society says I should have from what I actually need for a secure and meaningful financial life, because those are not always the same list. That said, and I want to be careful here because I don't want to just give you a pass and let you off the hook entirely, there are real financial markers that matter by your 40s, not because of some arbitrary social calendar, but because of math, because of how compound interest works, because of how retirement timelines work, because of how financial stress compounds into health problems and relationship problems and all of that. So yes, there are things worth paying attention to. Let's actually get into them. The retirement number, what it is, what it isn't, and why it's not too late. Okay, so you've probably heard some version of this. By 40, you should have roughly 2 to 3 times your annual salary saved for retirement. If you make $60,000 a year, that's somewhere between $120,000 and $180,000 sitting in a retirement account somewhere. Now, I want you to breathe for a second, because if that number made your stomach drop, you're not alone. A lot of people in their late 30s and 40s have significantly less than that. Some have almost nothing, and the narrative around that is usually pretty brutal, like you've blown it, the window is closed, you're going to be working until you're 75. That narrative is not accurate, but I also don't want to sugarcoat it, because the truth is, the earlier you start, the easier it is. Compound interest is real, it is powerful, and time is genuinely the biggest factor. Someone who saves $300 a month from age 25 will end up with more than someone who saves $600 a month starting at 40, just because of how the math compounds over time. That's not a scare tactic, that's just arithmetic. But here's what's also true. You still have 20 to 25 years until a traditional retirement age. 25 years is a long time. The market has historically doubled roughly every 10 years. So if you start aggressively now, you're not starting from zero. You're starting from today with the power of compounding still on your side. What does aggressively look like practically? It means maxing out your tax-advantaged accounts if you can. In the US, that's your 401k up to the employer match first. Always, always, always get the full match, because that's literally free money. And then your IRA, Roth or traditional, depending on your tax situation. And if you're over 50, you get to make catch-up contributions that let you put in more than the standard limit. The system actually has a built-in catch-up mechanism. It's almost like they knew people would be behind. If maxing everything out sounds impossible because money is tight, okay, start somewhere. Even $50 a month is better than zero. And then build the habit of increasing that number every time your income goes up. The goal is momentum. You're building momentum.
Debt, the specific kind that's quietly wrecking your future. This one I feel like doesn't get talked about with enough nuance, because people tend to lump all debt together, and that's not quite right. There's debt that limits you, and there's debt that's basically neutral or even useful. High-interest consumer debt, credit cards, personal loans with ugly interest rates, buy now, pay later stuff that's piled up, that's limiting debt. It's actively working against you. Every dollar you pay in interest to a credit card company at 22% APR is a dollar that will never compound in your favor. If you carry $10,000 in high-interest credit card debt into your 40s and you're making minimum payments, you could easily spend 15 years paying it off and end up paying 2 or 3 times the original amount. That's not dramatic, that's math. A mortgage, on the other hand, that's different. Yes, you owe money, but you also own an asset that, generally, over long periods, appreciates. Student loans are more nuanced, depends on the rate, the income it helped you generate, whether you can refinance. Car loans are generally fine if they're reasonable relative to your income. The thing I'd encourage you to be really honest with yourself about by your 40s is, what debt do I actually carry that has no corresponding asset? That's the debt to attack. Not because of shame. I genuinely don't believe debt should come with shame, because most people accumulate it during genuinely hard seasons of life, but because of practical math. Every percentage point of interest you're paying to someone else is a percentage point that's not building your future. A quick, imperfect but useful framework: if your debt interest rate is higher than 7%, roughly what the stock market averages over time, you are almost certainly better off paying down that debt aggressively before investing heavily. If the rate is lower than that, the math actually suggests investing while making regular payments could be smarter. This is a simplification, of course. Real life has tax implications and psychological factors and all sorts of nuance, but as a starting point, it works. The emergency fund. Not sexy, but this is genuinely life-changing. I almost feel embarrassed talking about emergency funds because it sounds so basic. But here's the honest truth. Most people in their 40s who feel financially fragile, who feel like they're always one unexpected expense away from real trouble, it's often because they don't have one, or they have one that's way too small. The standard advice is 3 to 6 months of expenses. 6 months is better. And I know what you're thinking. That sounds like a huge amount of money, and it is. But think about what it actually buys you. An emergency fund is not a savings account. It's an insurance policy against your entire financial life. It's the thing that keeps you from going into debt when your car breaks down. It's what prevents you from panic selling investments during a market downturn because you need the money. It's the buffer that lets you make a career move without complete desperation driving the decision. I've known people, smart, capable people, who had everything else somewhat together financially but didn't have a real emergency fund. And then something happened. A layoff, a medical thing, a major home repair, and they went from financially okay to credit card debt and anxiety in about 90 days. It's the most common story there is. If you don't have this, start building it first, before the extra investing, before the aggressive debt paydown, outside of minimums. Build this, even if it takes you a year, even if you can only put away $100 a month. The psychological security it provides changes how you think, decide, and move through your financial life. I genuinely believe that. Income, the variable everyone underestimates. Here's where I'm going to say something that might sound counterintuitive. Cutting expenses matters, but by the time you're in your 40s, your ability to increase income is often a bigger lever than your ability to cut. There's a ceiling on how much you can cut. You can stop buying coffee and cancel subscriptions and shop sales, and at some point you've optimized pretty aggressively and you're still only saving an extra $200 a month, which is good, but it's limited. Your income, on the other hand, that's theoretically uncapped. And your 40s, honestly, are often the peak earning years for a lot of professions. Your experience, your network, your skills, they're worth more now than they've ever been. So the question I'd ask is, are you actually earning what you're worth? And I say that not as a vague motivational thing, but as a genuine analytical question. When was the last time you negotiated a raise? Have you ever actually researched what people with your skills and experience are making in your market? Because salary data has become so much more accessible. Websites, industry surveys, conversations with peers. And what a lot of people find when they actually look is that they've been underpaid for years. Not because their employer is evil, but because salaries don't automatically keep pace with your growing value. You have to advocate for them. A 15% raise is equivalent to years of saving. Think about that. If you're making $70,000 and you negotiate to $80,500, the difference over 10 years invested is extraordinary. The raise does more than almost any budget tweak you could engineer. And beyond raises, are there skills adjacent to what you do that would make you significantly more valuable? Is there a side income you could build that uses what you already know? I'm not talking about hustle culture and working yourself into the ground. I'm talking about looking honestly at your income and asking whether it's working as hard as it could be. Investing basics, what you actually need to understand. Okay, so I know I've mentioned investing a few times here, and I want to spend a real minute here because I think a lot of people in their 40s have a weird relationship with investing. Either they haven't started because it feels complicated and intimidating, or they've been doing it in a scattered, unsystematic way, or, and this is very common, they have money in a 401k somewhere but they've never actually looked at what it's invested in. Let me just say this clearly. You do not need to be a financial expert to invest well. You don't need to pick stocks, follow market news, or understand derivatives. What you actually need is embarrassingly simple, broad diversification and consistency over time. Index funds are the thing. Low-cost, broad market index funds, a simple total stock market fund, maybe some bond component depending on your age and risk tolerance, maybe some international exposure. Set it up, automate contributions, and then, this is the hard part, don't mess with it. Don't panic when the market drops. Don't get excited and dump money into whatever's trending. Just let time do the work. The research on this is overwhelming. Over long periods, most actively managed funds, run by professionals who spend all day thinking about this, don't outperform simple index funds after fees. The answer for most people really is that simple. And yet so many people avoid investing because they think they need to understand things they actually don't. If you haven't started, start now. Open an account, pick a basic index fund, automate a contribution, and then go live your life. The best investment strategy is almost always the one you can stick with. The relationship with money, the psychological layer nobody talks about enough. This one is the one I find most interesting, honestly, because I think it's the most predictive of long-term financial outcomes. By your 40s, you've had enough financial experiences to have developed real, specific patterns around money. Patterns about how you feel when you spend, when you save, when you have it, when you don't. About what money means to you emotionally, security, freedom, status, love, control. About whether you believe, somewhere deep down, that you're the kind of person who's good with money or not. And here's what's wild. That last one, the identity piece, might be the most powerful force in your entire financial life. Because if you believe you're bad with money, you will unconsciously find ways to confirm that belief. You'll avoid looking at your accounts. You'll make impulsive purchases and tell yourself, well, that's just me. You'll feel vaguely hopeless about ever really getting ahead, and that hopelessness becomes self-fulfilling. Conversely, people who build a genuine belief that they're capable of managing money, even if they've made mistakes in the past, start making different choices. They look at their accounts, they ask questions, they feel like they have agency. This isn't motivational fluff. This is how identity shapes behavior, and it's been studied extensively. The story you tell yourself about your financial self matters enormously. So I'd invite you to think about it. What do you actually believe about yourself and money? Not what you know intellectually. What do you believe in your gut? Because that belief might be doing more to shape your financial reality than any specific decision you've made. If that belief is limiting, it can be changed, not overnight, not through affirmations alone, but through small, repeated evidence that you can do this. Every time you make a budget and stick to it, every time you save when you said you would, every time you make a thoughtful financial decision instead of a reactive one, you're building a new story, and that story compounds, just like interest. What catching up actually looks like. Practically, realistically, week to week. Okay, let's get grounded here because I've thrown a lot at you and I don't want this to just be an abstract conversation. What does catching up actually look like week to week for a real person? It starts with clarity. You cannot catch up if you don't know where you are. This sounds obvious, but it's shocking how many people avoid looking at the full picture. All the debt, all the accounts, all the numbers. Get the full picture. Write it down. Put it somewhere you can look at it. A spreadsheet, a notebook, an app, whatever works. Just get clear. Then you build what I'd call a gap map. Where are you and where do you want to be? Not in a vague, I want to be rich sense, but specifically, what does retirement look like for you and roughly how much would that require? What do you want your debt situation to look like in 5 years? What would having an emergency fund actually change for you day to day? Once you have the gap, you can build toward it. You prioritize ruthlessly. Emergency fund first, high-interest debt second, tax-advantaged retirement contributions third, then broader investing and savings. You increase income where you can. You reduce spending where it doesn't bring real value to your life, not in a punishing way, but in a thoughtful way. And then you automate. This is crucial. The research is clear that willpower is a finite resource, and people who rely on willpower to save consistently almost always fail eventually. But people who automate, who set up a transfer on payday before they can spend the money, consistently save. Make the system do the work. Then you be patient. And this is the hardest part, honestly, because catching up isn't a moment, it's a sustained direction. You're not going to feel dramatically different in 3 months, but in 18 months, you might look up and realize you have a buffer for the first time in your adult life. And in 5 years, the compounding starts to feel real. A note on comparison, the thing that makes everything harder. I want to come back to that dinner party scenario from the beginning because I think it's worth addressing directly. The person who paid off their house, you don't know if they had help. You don't know if they inherited money or got a lump sum from somewhere or made a sacrifice that you wouldn't want to make. The person with the investment portfolio might have started investing in their early 20s because their parents taught them how to, or because they had a lower cost life that gave them more room, or they might be performing confidence they don't fully feel. Comparison is corrosive because it gives you the other person's outcome without any of their context. You're comparing your behind the scenes with their highlight reel, and it generates shame that is almost always unearned and always unproductive. Your 40s are your 40s. Your life has the shape it has. What matters now is what you do from here. That's all that's ever been in your control. The real milestones that matter by 40. So let me actually try to summarize what I think genuinely matters, not the rigid benchmarks, but the real ones. You should have a clear picture of your financial life, not necessarily a perfect picture, but a clear one. No more avoidance, no more vague sense of dread. You know the numbers. You should have some retirement savings with momentum. Even if it's less than the benchmarks suggest, it should be growing. You should be contributing consistently to something. You should have a plan for high-interest debt. Even if you're not done paying it off, the plan matters. Intention with action. You should have or be building an emergency fund that would genuinely cover a rough patch. And maybe most importantly, you should have a healthy enough relationship with money that it's not a source of constant anxiety and avoidance. That's not about the numbers. That's about how you show up to the financial parts of your life. If you have those things, even imperfectly, even partially, you're actually doing okay. Not perfect, but okay. And okay is a starting point. Closing, because I don't want to leave you with just information. Here's what I want you to actually walk away with today. 40 is not a verdict. It is not the moment the game ends. It is, if anything, the moment most people finally have enough experience, enough self-awareness, and enough genuine motivation to make real change. Because you've lived enough life to know what actually matters. You've made enough mistakes to know what you won't do again. And you still have enough time, genuinely, mathematically enough time, to build something meaningful. The people who catch up financially in their 40s and 50s don't usually do it because they suddenly became brilliant with money. They do it because they stopped avoiding it. They got honest about their situation. They made a plan that was simple enough to actually follow, and they stayed consistent even when it wasn't dramatic or exciting. There's no magic, but there's also no permanent damage. Where you are right now is just a position on a map. It doesn't determine where you're going. So if you've been carrying some quiet shame about where you are financially, if you've been nodding at those dinner party conversations while feeling like a fraud, I'd gently ask you to put that down. It's not helping you. It never was. What helps is looking at the numbers, making a plan, and starting. Not Monday, not after the holidays, not when things calm down. Now, today. Even if starting means spending 20 minutes this weekend writing down everything you owe and everything you have, even if that's all you do this week, you're not as far behind as you feel, and the gap between where you are and where you want to be is smaller than the shame has made it seem. I really believe that, and I think, if you're honest with yourself, some part of you does too. If this resonated with you, I'd love it if you shared it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you have thoughts, questions, or a version of this story that's your own, drop it in the comments. I read them. I genuinely do.